Hello, BookTube. I put out the call for our questions for an October Q&A, and once again, you bombarded me with questions. So this is the first video. We're going to try and go through these with dispatch. I want to stress the usual things, mainly that I copy the questions over onto my tablet here from the comments field of the video where I asked for the questions. So in the copying and pasting, your question might have got lost. I haven't had many incidents of that, but if it happens, just know that it's not premeditated. I'm not dodging your questions. You feel free to ask it next time. And also, if I mispronounce your name, of course, it's all between friends here. So let's just get started. I'm going to cut these off at the 30-minute mark until we're done. So the first question is from Joel Swagman. War and Peace. This book has come up a lot on these Q&As, but I don't recall ever hearing your opinion on Tolstoy's view of history. Do great men shape history? If we're not adding a qualitative note to the word great, then prominent people, men and women, of course, shape history. I've never understood at all the historical viewpoint that says that anything else. Of course, one person can change the course of history. Of course, that's true. It seems so self-evident that I don't really understand the large amounts of tractates that I've read back and forth on the subject. David Wiley says, "Okay, Steve, let's have it. What are you planning to write for NaNoWriMo? Give us a synopsis / overview of what you think the story will be." I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been letting the side down by not making Preptober videos on this channel. But I kept coming back and back to one kind of story that I want to write. And it occurred to me that writers of all kinds, not just science fiction writers, of course my story for NaNoWriMo will be science fiction to coincide with New World's November. But it's not just science fiction writers. Writers of all kinds have themes. They have preoccupations, things they come back to over and over again. And it's not just a question of, oh, this sold well in one earlier book, so even though I'm not interested anymore, I will still revisit it so that I can sell a book well again. I think authors just naturally have themes. And I consulted with Mark Richardson to bounce this off him, check it with him, just to make sure my moral trigonometry was right and I wasn't just being a grinding bore. And he agrees, of course, that writers have themes that they come back to at least a few times until they get it out of their system. And the reason that I was worried about that is because the science fiction story that I want to tell it deals with a theme that I have come back to a few times in recent fiction, and that is devices like this. A science fiction story that revolves around a device. In this case, not so much a device as something that lives inside the device. And when I thought about that, I immediately came up with a story and the particulars of how I want to do it. It's the story of a young boy who buys a very cheap tablet online because his old tablet is falling to pieces and is well behind the technological curve, and because he's a teenage boy, that it will be easy for him to root the thing and strip off all of the cheap manufacturer's bloatware and make it a much better machine than the price tag warrants. It's a totally simple thing. Happens 1,000 times a day. But something happens in the course of that procedure. And the challenge with this story, I like every story that I write for NaNoWriMo to have a challenge of some kind or other. Not to the reader, but to me. Something that I haven't quite done before. And the challenge for this one will be a slow deployment of what happens. The storyline, I think, will work best if it deploys slowly. If I, in other words, ratchet up the tension, which is not something I'm good at doing. So I'm not good at the gradual approach. But that's the rough idea of this thing. I know the characters involved. I know the plot. I know what's actually going to happen. And I think I have a very firm idea of how I want to do it. I want to make sure, once again, I'm going to do a chapter a day. I think NaNoWriMo works best that way. For me, anyway. So I'm going to do 1,667 word or 1,700 word chapter every day. As I slowly, step by step, build this thing to its conclusion. I already know what the last scene is, so that'll help a lot. So all I'm going to do is continue to refine how I'm going to do that for the rest of October, and then in November I will hit the ground running with writing. But I will make more videos about Preptober. Let's see here. Flora Should Be Reading says, "Hey Steve, 2 questions for you if I may. Number 1, Who would be your favorite minor Austen character? Someone who has a smaller part to play in the novels, but whom you find delightful / fascinating. I've said this many times before. For me, that would be Mrs. Gardner. I think there's a long story behind Mrs. Gardner that we only get the slightest hint of. Number 2, I know you mentioned teaching college classes. Did you ever teach interactive seminars where you had to get students talking, and how did you manage that? I ask because one of the most challenging things for me sometimes is getting my students to talk about a text. Well, yes, Flora should be reading. I intuited that you were an academic of some kind by the fact that in question number 1, you explained to me what is meant by a minor character. So the revelation in question number 2 that you are, in fact, a teacher of some kind is no great shocker. And for me, the key thing here is when you say getting students to talk about a text. For me, when I did it, the absolute salted line in the earth was they have to do the reading. I'm not interested in anyone BSing who hasn't done the reading. If you haven't done the reading, then you can't participate in a conversation about the reading. That I dread to think what I would encounter now. Teachers that I know in the undergraduate college world have many times in the last few years encountered students who proudly say they haven't done the reading, and that what they intend to do in class is talk about their quote-unquote lived experience, whether it has anything to do with the reading or not. And God forbid you shut them up when they're talking about their lived experience. And only a few of those friends of mine have had the courage to say to the student, no, you're not. You're not going to speak at all. If you haven't done the reading, then you haven't done the work for the class. So you'd be wasting everyone's time. Only a few of them have had the courage even to hint at such a thing, because they'd go viral. The students are all filming them. No, I don't want to hear about what it was like for you to grow up on the res when we talk about David Copperfield. A teacher who is caught on camera saying that will lose their job. They know they will. They will lose their job. So they don't tend to do it. They edge around it a lot more. I'm not very good at edging around things, so it would be disastrous if I had done it. But at the time, I told my students, you have to do the reading. If you don't do the reading, you knew ahead of time when you signed up for this class that the reading was part of the class. If you don't do the reading, then you're not keeping even a half of your end of the bargain here. And so I'm not going to have any interest. You can just sit in silence when we're talking about the reading because you haven't done it. You don't know what we're talking about. And B, I'll fail you. You can't sign up for a class in which a huge percentage of your grade is based on your participation, and a huge percent of that participation is based on you doing the reading, and then just not do the reading and still expect to pass. You won't. I absolutely am not interested. I won't even read papers if I know you haven't done the reading, because I know that you stole it from somewhere. But if you get past that hurdle, once the students had done the reading, and I made sure to characterize the reading as a gateway to fun rather than a chore, that you have to do this reading in order for us to talk about it, and the talking about it is going to be a lot of fun. And I had it happen almost universally that the students who hadn't done the reading the first time and saw that the conversation actually was fun, because I wasn't talking down to anybody, because we were just talking about what we read, the lack of condescension was key. Once the students who hadn't done the reading saw how much fun it was when they did the reading, and that their opinion would be listened to, respected, they did it. Usually, the next time we met, they had done the reading. Other than that, I don't know any other way than that. I mean, look at this channel. Imagine how much fun we would have if you came over to talk about a book that we had read in common. We'd be going for hours. It's the exact same kind of conversation I would have with students. I made sure to let them know, beyond a few historical points, there's no right or wrong way to do this. I do not have an interpretive dogma that you have to parrot. Instead, I want to hear, what did you think about this character? Were you paying any attention to them at all? Did it strike you in any way? What were your impressions? Your impressions will be different from mine, and that's fascinating. So, once we got to that point, the dividing line here is the reading, doing the reading. There's nothing you can do with a student who hasn't read the text. There's no way that you can, well, okay, maybe you can participate in the dialogue anyway. No, you can't. Unless you've read the text, you can't participate. So just sit there in silence or sit on your phone. But you're going to fail. It's not like you can do that and then I'm going to read your BS essay at the end of the class. No, Now, you don't know what you're talking about. Sorry, a bit of a long question about teaching. Let's move on to Jim's books, reading, and stuff. Is there a character in the Star Wars universe who you feel would make an interesting character in the Star Trek universe? Well, that gets into a long discussion about what those different universes are like. Star Wars universe, at least in the original trilogy, was very low tech. I don't know if you've noticed this about Star Wars. It's very low tech and very grubby. It's a very proletariat view of a science fiction reality. We get royalty, yes, and sure we get palaces, but we get a lot of people who are just cobbling together technology, and the technology doesn't always seem that good. I mean, like for instance, look at the fan fetishized character of Boba Fett. His firearm is not good. It looks like you could take it apart fairly easily. His jetpack is famously not good. His helmet is not good. It would restrict him to almost complete blindness. It just the tech in Star Wars seems to be very low on the tech scale. And I would also argue that a lot of the characters in the Star Wars universe are also grubby. And I don't mean just the evil, just the Sith characters. I mean a lot of them seem to be kind of boring, kind of close-minded and small in their worldviews. Rather than take a Star Wars character who I would transplant into the Star Trek world, I would probably transplant Harry Mudd into the Star Wars world. He'd make a fortune. He'd clean up with all these simps. Then let's see here. Luke and Jennifer Higgins have a barrage of questions. Number 1, do you enjoy Michael Cox's The Meaning of Light and The Glass of Time? Yes. Number 2, we know you read anything and everything that comes within your grasp, but what is your take on those of us with limited time DNFing books? For those of you who are watching this who don't know BookTube, I don't know why you would be, but that means did not finish. That DNF is when a reader decides, I'm not going to put this aside for some other time, I'm going to drop it. It's not working for me. Any tips on how to know if a reader should keep plowing on with a book or just close the covers and run? And I do have lots of tips. I have a complicated relationship with DNFing because on the one hand, I totally agree with all of the people, including Sean the Bookmaniac, our Empress of Bailings, that you should not just persist in reading a book that's not doing anything for you at all. This connects with an absurd incendiary bot tweet that was done on Twitter just a little while ago where someone said it's a personal insult to the author if you don't finish their book when you start it. I've got a lot of great responses. I absolutely loved it. I didn't weigh in myself because it was obviously just a troll. I of course agree with that completely. If you're reading a book and it's not doing anything for you, well, this isn't assigned reading, so just drop it. The only quibble that I have with DNFing, especially in our little corner of BookTube, is that you have to be careful with what an action itself does to you, separate and apart from the action itself. I think that it's pretty obvious that DNFing a book gives you a little dopamine hit. It's a little surge. It's like you're getting out of school early or something like that. Even when the book richly deserves it, even when you've given the book 20 or 30 pages more than you should, there's still a little rush that comes with DNFing. And I always worry about little rushes, no matter where they happen, no matter what produces them, because they become habit-forming on their own. And if you're not careful, you will start to do the thing that gives you the little rush, even when it's not warranted, just to get the little rush. If that makes any sense at all. Let's liken it to partying, because we're wild and crazy partiers here on BookTube. Let's say you go out with friends to a venue. It's called the Steam Room, and they can't describe it to you, but they're pretty sure that you're going to like it. You walk in the door, you go downstairs, and the Steam Room turns out to be pitch black. It's full of people, hundreds and hundreds of people, and flashing strobe lights and really bad, loud music. Not possible to hear anyone, not possible to know where you are, not possible to find the bar without groping through people to get to it, which is the whole point. But it's not possible to dance because there are way too many people. It's basically a snapshot of the infernal regions. So you go to the Steam Room with your friends. They haven't described it to you. You set one foot in the Steam Room, and you know beyond any shadow of a doubt, I'm leaving. I know I paid my $8 to get in, but I'm leaving. Right now, I'm leaving. No offense to you. No argument with any of your friends. No hurt feelings of any kind, but I'm going. There is no chance at all that I'm going to enjoy any aspect of this experience. There's that. Then there's the kind of party you go to that is in maybe a loft in Soho, and it's a bunch of people and they're talking. There's music in the background, but it's not oppressively loud. There are no children running around demanding attention or biting you and having their parents say, "Isn't that cool?" or anything like that. There isn't anything like that. It's just a bunch of people talking, and there's music playing in the background, and it seems like you could probably find a corner and a couple of interesting people, and, you know, with a sufficient amount of alcohol, have an enjoyable time. And then after an hour, you realize everyone's talking about Marxism. No one has a sense of humor. There's no laughter. There's no change in wording and vocal tone or anything like that. There's no enjoyment going on here. And after an hour of giving it a fair try, because it looked at the first like something you might possibly enjoy, you decide, now I'm gonna just pack it in and leave. You know, you make a diplomatic excuse. I've got papers to grade or something like that, and you go. Those are two different DNFs, right? And usually it's been my experience that a book, unless it's egregiously awful, can never be the first kind of DNF, where you open it, you read a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs and say, no, absolutely not. And if you feel like DNFing a book that someone has labored on for 2 years, after so little exposure, the fault is probably yours. And that's probably a bad DNF, either done through pettishness or because you're looking for that dopamine thrill. Whereas the second kind is totally permissible. That is totally, well, everything's permissible, but the second kind is totally understandable to me. I don't tend to do it myself because I read very fast, and because I've had way too many books pull a curveball on me in the last act and get really good. Do something that throws light on the rest of the book and changes retroactively the reading experience. I would argue, in my own experience, the most famous example for me of a book that did that was Crime and Punishment, which is kind of a classic. But it happens with other books too. So I usually don't do it myself, unless it's the first kind of DNF, unless I wander into a book knowing nothing about it and realize right away, no, this isn't going to work at all. The key here, though, that I want to stress, even though I draw a distinction between those kinds of DNFs, those two kinds, I still want to stress that in both cases, you are completely justified to make your excuses and leave. That troll bot on Twitter was completely wrong. That was the whole point of the tweet, is that was completely wrong. You're not betraying anyone. You don't owe an author anything. In fact, if after an hour the author has not convinced you to stay, then the author has failed you. It's not you failing the author. But anyway, you've got another question here. Amelia, I knew Amelia was going to come up. I was wondering. Amelia does not have a question this time, but she, as well as her proud parents, would like to thank you for the pep talk regarding her need to buckle down learning math. Oh, I remember that. Yes, indeed. She's now earning a solid B in math. Thank you. Oh, goodness gracious, Amelia, that's wonderful. A solid B in a subject you don't like? That says a lot about you, and all of it is good. that is really, really, it's not only really, really good that you're learning math, because you are going to need it. If you're going to go into any kind of profession that's going to affect the world, you're going to need a grounding in math. Maybe not much, right? Your tablet or your phone, computers will always be able to do a bulk of the work. You're not going to be a professional mathematician, right? There are only about 30 of them in the world. But you're going to need to know this stuff. This is not only good for that reason, but getting a solid B in a subject you've already said you hate shows a lot about your character. It shows you have self-discipline. And that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. We need more of that. Good for you. Congratulations. Oh boy, I think this is all downhill from there. Let's go to the next one though. John M. has a barrage of questions. Number one, what do you make of the writings of Jorge Luis Borges? I like Borges very much. Number two, do you have a favorite poem by Francis Thompson? It would be very cliche on my part. The Hound of Heaven is, I think, great. So I think it's ominous. I don't tend to agree with the theology that's actually embodied in the poem, but I think it's lovely. I know that's everybody's favorite, but number three, what do you think of the book The Pushcart War? I don't think I've ever read it. And number four, what is the most interesting part of evolutionary theory to you? The most interesting part of evolutionary theory? For me, probably the most interesting, I guess it's a part of evolutionary theory, it's something called convergent evolution, where the same thing, the same feature, evolves completely separately in completely different lines of life. to meet roughly analogous environmental needs. I always think it's fascinating that, for instance, the eye, something like an eye, has independently evolved any number of times in the history of life on Earth. I think it's fascinating that life forms on Earth have colonized the air independently 3 times. That's just astonishing to me. When you see an example of convergent evolution, 2 things that look completely connected, but they aren't connected in any way except that the forces of the environment and natural selection have created that same answer. I know there are a lot. There's the genome, so that this takes a back seat. But I still think that convergent evolution, the fact that we know that it happens, the fact that you can see that it's real, I still think that is one of the most knockdown demonstrations of the validity of this whole idea. If the whole idea weren't true, that would never happen. That's what I love. I've read a couple of whole books on convergent evolution, including The Runes of Evolution, which I love. I love these questions. I swear, I don't know where you people get them, but I could do this all day. Let's see here. Chris Bianchi says, what are your thoughts on Georges Simenon's novels? I love them. What do you think of Gore Vidal's novel, Myra Breckenridge? It's a little bit overdone. It's not his best novel by a long shot, I would argue. Any thoughts on Dino Buzzati's novel, The Tartar Steppe, or Coco Abe's novel, The Woman in the Dunes? Well, any thoughts on them? Well, yeah, I have lots and lots of thoughts. Are you asking me if I like them? I'm not particularly fond of either one of them, but beyond that, yeah, lots and lots of thoughts about Coco Abe, especially about the place in literary canon or whatnot. So certainly discoursing my thoughts on 2 books that have been read by millions of people is not anything for a Q&A. But I kind of sort of like both of them. Let's see here. Justin Raymond says, hi, Steve. Quick question. If you have a science fiction bookshelf and a general literature bookshelf, where do you put 1984 and Brave New World? I put them in science fiction. You know why? Because the things that are in them aren't in the real world. Nothing like them is in the real world. And so they go in science fiction / fantasy. And I'm not going to turn this into a rant about carpetbaggers like Margaret Atwood, but nevertheless, if it's science fiction, it goes in science fiction. If you take 1984 or Brave New World or Handmaid's Tale, and you put it in literature, what are you saying about science fiction? You're saying about that book, well, I think it's good enough so that it graduates from the ghetto. Don't you? I don't agree with that kind of thinking at all. I don't care about the quality of the literature at all, and I don't care about the canonical status of the book. I care only about whether or not the things that are in it are something I can walk out the street and encounter. And if the answer to that question is no, then I don't care if it's an invading fleet of Martians or a social program. I don't care what it is. If I can't walk out the door and encounter it, then it's science fiction. That would not be a trouble to me, that categorization. Longer question / request. Oh my, longer question / request don't usually coincide with Q&As. Let's see here. For Nonfiction November, what do you think about making a video where you offer recommendations of the best overview history of major moments / periods throughout history? For example, best overview histories of the Roman Empire, Middle Ages, Renaissance, Atlantic slave trade, the World Wars, Vietnam, etc., etc. Is that something you would find interesting to do? Well, it's analogous to my starter kits, right? It's not, I guess the starter kits aren't technically best of lists. But best of lists get tricky anyway when you're dealing with historical subjects. The histories of the Roman Empire, half of the best histories of the Roman Empire are not books that I could recommend to someone who hasn't read a lot about the Roman Empire. What good would that do? Nonfiction November overviews on subjects, that's a great idea. I should probably do. I want to do a lot of Nonfiction November videos, including a TBR, even though that's not realistic for me. I still want to do one. Let's see here. Anastasia B says, number 1, who, in your opinion, can be considered a talented actor and actress currently living? Well, this made me think of Marriage Story, the overhyped but very good movie Marriage Story, which starred Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver. Both of them out of costume, both of them out of science fiction epics, both of them just acting. And I thought it was really, really good. It reminded me that these people, no one is strong enough, morally speaking, to refuse a paycheck from a giant tentpole franchise. No actor or actress is strong enough morally to do that. You might prize your independence, but you prize the picnic table covered in cocaine that check will buy you a lot more. So you will say yes when that happens. No matter who you are, you will say yes. I just like it when some of those actors find other projects and remind us that they actually have a lot of talent. Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver are both really talented actors. And at least in Marriage Story, they got a chance to show that. And also, because a little bit of it went a little bit viral, people got to notice it, which was great. Let's see here. Number 2, you talk about Jesuit education that you received, but could you expand a little bit for those of us who know absolutely nothing about it, what it actually entails? Well, apart from the religious elements, and the religious elements for the Jesuits are extremely refreshing. They don't doubt that you're going to doubt. And they don't consider a study of the text to be a threat. For them, at least for most Jesuits that I've talked to or learned from or met or read, your faith is separate from fact, as it should be. There's no one has ever facted into faith, although they can be facted out of it. but the main factor for me, the main long-standing import for me, was that they also prized the use of the brain as a muscle, that you must be able to answer the unbeliever. You must know what you're talking about. You must read and remember. Huge amounts of our work was memory work, was just exercising your memory, your mind, your cognitive abilities, because it's a muscle like anything else. And the more you work on it, the sharper it will get. That's the most long-standing legacy from them that I had, aside from tons and tons of great reading, and also what I imagine will be a lifelong love of exegesis. Exegesis, to me, biblical exegesis is just so incredibly enjoyable that if I hesitate to say this because I love book reviewing, of course, but if I could get paid to do exegesis and just make a living off it, I would do nothing else. I wouldn't read anything else. I would probably abandon everything. I would have to wean myself off the habit of reading new stuff. But exegesis is just so much fun. It's a miracle to me, no pun intended, that I don't just have a whole library of it. I have to control myself. I just think it's thrilling. And I got that from them. Let's see here. Harrison Recht has a barrage of questions. Number 1, I was wondering how Ulysses S. Grant trilogy by Lloyd Lewis and Bruce Catton compares to some more recent Grant biographies. They're more thorough, but I was really pleased with Ron Chernow's biography of Grant, the big one-volume one. And Gene Edward Smith, also a fantastic biography of Grant. There have been a lot of great one-volume biographies. Grant is a person who I really don't think needs the extensive, here's his invoice from last Monday type treatment. I really don't. Grant, the whole point of Ulysses S. Grant is that he's entirely uninteresting until the Civil War. Even his service in the Mexican War is not particularly outstanding. It shows no hint, no matter what Grantophiles say, it shows no hint of anything that you are going to call battlefield genius in the American Civil War. And I don't see any battlefield genius in the American Civil War. No, so a study of Grant that takes us from the cradle until he starts to shine at Antietam or wherever is going to waste a lot of my time. I don't agree with that in gigantic protracted biographies of lots of public figures. Just, give me a couple of paragraphs about his nappies when he was a baby, and then move straight on to Bull Run. So that sort of thing is what I'd much rather have. And Ron Chernow's Grant biography does a great job of that. It bothers me that I don't have that book. I got an advance copy from the publisher, and I was trepidatious, right? Because I loved his Hamilton biography like everybody else in the world, and I hated his Washington biography. His Washington biography was terrible. And so it was literally half and half. I didn't care much about any of his earlier books. I was thinking, okay, he was doing Dorsett biographies now. He's done 2 so far of major American political figures, not J.P. Morgan or anything like that. And one I loved and one I hated. So much rides on this third one. And I got an advance copy from the publisher and read it. Really, really liked it. Got the finished copy, the big brick of a thing. And I think a publisher even sent me the big brick trade paperback. And I don't have any of them. I gave them all one after another away to other people. So I don't have that book now. It's a biography that's missing from my biography section. But anyway, you have more questions. Yes. Number 2, I really enjoyed A.J. Langouth's book, Patriots. Yes, yes, indeed. Very good book. Do you have any other favorites of his? I've really liked pretty much everything I've read by him. The other 2 that spring to mind are Noise of War, which is his quick, almost breathless history of Pompey and Crassus and Caesar, the changeover from Rome calling itself a republic to Rome calling itself an empire. The Noise of War was really good. No idea how much of Langouth is in print anymore. And also, he wrote a book called Our Vietnam. It's a 1-volume book on Vietnam that I really liked. Let's see here. And number 3, how are Norman Davies' lengthy histories of Europe and the British Isles as reading experiences? They are lengthy. I mean, you feel that they have longueurs. They don't just ripple along. They do for long stretches of time. The Isles is really worth reading. But don't expect, for instance, well, not to make either one of them mad, but don't expect Peter Ackroyd. Peter Ackroyd doesn't have longueurs, no matter how long the book is. You're just rippling right along. I would say the same thing is true of Andrew Roberts. Even though he manages always to cheese me off on every book that he writes, I still am never bored. Never a feeling where I think, oh, okay, maybe an assistant padded this part out just because you have to do it in order to get to the next interesting bit. There is some of that in Norman Davies, but not much. How are we doing here? Oh, we're done. All right, we're going to stop this one, and we'll come back for part 2.